Hi, everybody. We are here.
This is our soft open.
So soft.
You made it weird. You made it weird. You
We
made
should
it
just,
weird. Oh, yeah.
I kind of want to call it our squishy open instead of soft open. Instead.
The You Made It Weird podcast, you should look into that.
Oh, yeah. You were telling me about that.
Good stuff. Just good conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And the comedian hosting it is a weird guy, but like in a nice guy way. And
That helps. Yeah.
he's in a similar place. It's Pete Holmes. He's like, I guess I'm an atheist.
Interesting.
He's like, I wouldn't call me that. Other people would call me that.
Yeah, because I heard one of his jokes where it actually made it sound like he wasn't, it was just a joke, but it was almost like taking a dig at atheists. But yeah, I don't know. I guess I'll have to listen to his thing and find out more. But yeah, so speaking of finding out more, I want to find out what you're drinking tonight, Matt.
I am drinking Gill
Ooh.
from West
Oh,
Side
yeah.
Brewing in Cincinnati. German Irish style lager.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an Irish lager that tastes like pretzels.
All right, tonight I can't remember if I've had this one on the show or not before. It's been so long, I can't really remember. But yeah, Mad Tree Phantom Forest Imperial IPA.
That is being discontinued, I think.
Oh, well, it's
At
still
least
in a variety
in cans.
pack, so
Yeah, at least in cans. Maybe it'll be in the variety pack, but like it's not going to be a thing. That's what Erin was told.
Yeah,
because it's one of the ones she likes.
Well, good thing I got at least possibly some of the last of them. So, all right. Well, I'm excited about things to talk about. So, what say we talk about some things?
Are we going to launch the things?
Yeah.
Let's launch the things.
Alrighty. Here we go.
Hello, welcome to the Humanity, where we do the things with the stuff for the people. I'm Matt.
I'm oddly intrigued. Sounded almost that was this, like I'm like, are we on NPR now?
I don't know. I'm in a weird mood. I was kind of grumpy today.
Yeah, I've had those days. They suck.
Off and on.
Yeah, it's all right.
What are we here for?
We're here for things and stuff. This time from a people. We have our very first ever, second ever audience submitted topic for the evening. First, just want to throw this out there. You'll see in the comments if you have show suggestions or really just anything. You can email us at thehumanitylive@gmail.com or just leave a comment here on the live stream, whether on Facebook or YouTube. You can send direct messages to us there. And if you know us, which a lot of people who watch do, text us or whatever. But first, I had a little. This is kind of a current event because it happened over the weekend, but just more a little personal story. And actually, I don't know if I told you about this, Matt. But no, it was good. And I think not that I'm aware of. I did have a bonding moment with a stranger, but over a shared interest in food. But anyway, I guess I should probably tell the story instead of hinting it, because I think it kind of ties into our topic for the evening, which we will get to as soon as I'm done talking about me. So over the weekend, this past weekend here in Cincinnati, we had our annual Asian Food Festival, which is amazing. So, I highly recommend it, but y'all just missed it. So, catch it next year. Um,
Catch it on the flip.
so, I had this experience where it seemed like several things were like lining up, and it just seemed like too much of a coincidence. Turned into some really cool things. So basically, I was in line for food, and it was this huge long line that like because like a lot of the lines there at the Asian Food Fest are going. But real quick to shout out, hey Jimmy, how you doing, buddy?
How's it going, Jimmy?
Yeah, how are you, Matt? Tell Jimmy how you're doing.
I'm good.
Good, correct. So anyway,
do I get to eat now?
But no, sir, you may not have another.
Oh.
But or some more. I'm getting my movies mixed up. Anyway, back to I'm getting derailed from my derailment. So I'm in line, and I also happen to be wearing this T-shirt, which folks can't tell. It's Mayhem, specifically for their album Chimera, which is one of my favorites, if not my favorite of theirs. So this guy behind me in line, he notices my T-shirt. He's like, "Oh, hey, is that a Mayhem T-shirt?" And I'm like, "Sweet!" Like first of all, almost never run into someone out in the wild who's also a Mayhem fan, much less like also really enjoys this album. Because I guess for some reason it's one of their least popular ones. I don't know why. Fucking rips in my opinion, but here or there. So then he tells me, "Oh, have you heard of this band called Cloak? They're like from like Atlanta or something. They're like black metal. They're really good." It's like, "No, I'd never heard of them." So he's like, "Oh, well, you should check them out." And like, so we had a nice little moment, and then I had my little like social anxious. All right, I'm done talking now, stranger. So I just turned back around and was talking to my kids and stuff. So
you're like, kids, say things to me.
But then I saw them. Then I saw like they got out of line. Like there was like, oh, we actually because this line we were in was so long, it was going past like several other booths.
Oh.
So it's like a lot of people were thinking that it was a line for a completely different booth than it actually was. So people, so him and the person he was with, they get out of line and go into another booth, and then I also realized, wait, we're in the wrong line. So we get out and go. So I was just thinking about that and how it was like such a coincidence, like all these things happen to line up. So I was thinking back to like a conversation. I don't remember when it was. A few weeks ago, that was that example of me like driving through downtown, and there happened to be that one building that happened to like perfectly block the sun for me, and how people are looking for like, well, this is totally a God thing because look how everything lined up. I'm like, so I'm starting to realize since like becoming atheist, like I still have a lot of those experiences where as a Christian I would have said, oh, this is totally a God thing. Only I'm just noticing them as just random cool things that I don't have to look for that for. Because I was thinking about this situation, and if it had been like different, like say I was wearing like a T-shirt from Crossroads, a church we used to go to, or something. Which I have several of those because they like giving everyone their T-shirts because marketing. So say I'd been wearing that out in public, and this guy would come up behind me and he said, "Hey, is that a Crossroads shirt?" And like, "Oh yeah, totally." And then like if I'd like recommended, "Oh, have you been to Man Camp?" Or he's like, "Oh, you should check out this small group that I'm in. It's really cool. It's there. They meet at the church. It's awesome." We both were like, "Oh, we were in the wrong line." The story would have been, "Oh, this was such a God thing. Like he brought you together. He made him like so bold to speak up and point out your shirt." But now it's like, if anything, we can have to thank for this situation. It's the power of satanic black metal. But I just thought, see, that's a cool little something to be like. Yeah, is that making sense? The way I'm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So anyway, so I thought that kind of tied into our topic for the evening, which is. Give me a sec.
No.
I'll do it anyway. So, sorry, I gotta find the question again. So, Matt, if you just want to talk for a second for the people, like, did you have any thoughts on my little story, my Bob? Or
oh, I think it's actually like a pretty good chance that you guys run into each other because it would make sense that you guys, I mean, have the similar taste in music, so you similar taste in food kind of makes sense. And
Similar taste in the wrong line. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you said a lot of people were in the wrong line.
Yeah.
So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No, but I think there is something where like people with different, or similar mental makeups end up in the same places. That just kind of makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Although Aaron's mom, my mother-in-law, she has this really uncanny habit of showing up where her grandchildren or in-laws are, like random places, like the same like random cafe or she'd never been to before. She just felt, or a store that she doesn't really go to, but she decided to go inside and then like walks like straight towards us or something. So there's something.
Yeah.
But
yeah. Like I said, where before I was like, oh, that's got to totally be God, but now I'm like, no, this kind of stuff just happens, and it's cool. Like I still dig it, but so yeah. So anyway, so tonight, like I said, very excited. We have another viewer suggested topic. So they just sent me a message. They wish to remain anonymous, so if I accidentally say their name, smack me or yell at me or something. I don't know. Anyway, so basically what they're wanting us to respond to the notion that everything is evil in absence of God, and that any existence of anything good is evidence of God and his goodness. So I'm like, whew, so many places to go with that.
Yeah.
And also, thank you very much for the suggestion.
Yeah, this is a good one.
So, yeah, and they also shared some of their like first like knee jerk reactions. They says like to point out that there are those who do good in absence of God and without giving any credit to God. But then the God believer will say that the goodness that was done from God, and there really is no shaking that belief from them because that's just how they think. So, yeah. So, first of all, like not only suggesting a topic, but then also offering your own little snippets.
Yeah, that's good too.
Yeah.
So there's lots of different ways to go with this.
Yeah. So
I might take some notes in front of me just because my brain's going to go like so many different places.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Okay. What do you have off the top of your head with that?
Well, the first thing that came to mind, like just with so the notion that everything is evil in absence of God. I don't know if this is necessarily where they were going with it, but it's what it's making me think of is this idea that evil is just the absence of good or the absence of love or the absence of God.
I mean, yeah, I could kind of. I don't remember the argument against that, or I like. I can see how somebody could think that, but then it's not consistent because people who usually say that will then talk about evil as if it has a will, or it's a thing, not just it's an absence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's because I pretty much only hear it like usually like from like religious folks, usually Christians, but maybe people of other religions might say it as well. I'm just not as familiar with them, but yeah, but and I remember, like as a Christian thinking, oh yeah, that sounds right, but I don't really remember why, or I don't even really remember like what the point is in making that kind of distinction. Like I know it's usually used in the midst of making some kind of argument about morality and, or maybe like in things like the problem of evil. Oh yeah, that's what it is. Usually, a lot of times brought up in the concept of the the argument about the problem of evil and like say, well, evil is just the absence of good. So all it really takes for evil things to happen is just a lack of good or a lack of God kind of thing. But I'm like, no, I think a lot of times evil is very much like a thing or whatever you want to call evil, whether you think evil exists or whatever.
Yeah.
But because I mean, yeah, just even the Bible talks about, like you said, it talks about evil like it's a thing. Like it says, there are things like, flee from evil and things like that. Like, how can you flee from something that's just an absence of something? It's not really a thing.
I mean, you can flee a shadow, but like you're not really just kind of running to a different area. You're not really fleeing something.
Yeah, or there's plenty of verse in the Bible that call people like doers of evil or something.
Yeah,
yeah. So yeah, the whole concept of evil just being an absence of good. I mean, that can be evil. Like if there is like something good you should be doing, but that you're perfectly capable of, but you just choose not to, like just out of spite or whatever.
Yeah, there's no vacuum though. It's not like if good isn't there, then there just isn't anything there. Because evil would be like something in its place, and so if it's just good is absent, then like if things are still happening in the absence of good, then it's just completely neutral. You know what I mean? It's just baseline.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't even know how you would argue that. I think that there can't really be an absence of God, and if God is an omni everything, you know, if God is omnipresent, then like the absence of God is a nonsensical phrase.
Yeah, because that almost makes it sound like if the absence of God was possible, then that would mean that humans are more powerful than the Bible also says we are. Because if God is omnipresent and it's His will to be omnipresent, it's almost because it's also like any evil is obviously blamed on the people, not God. I mean, unless you're like a hardcore Calvinist predeterminist, and you're like, yeah, God's in charge of all things, good and evil. But then that would mean, but they usually put it. But people who wouldn't blame God for evil, like would put it in terms of, well, evil just happens because of things we choose to do, and if we choose to like separate ourselves from God, it's like, well, but if God is omnipresent and omnipotent, all powerful, and He's wanting to be everywhere, if that means that we would have to be pretty powerful in order to create a situation where we are separate from an omnipresent being.
Yeah. And then it just so has to just mean that God is present wherever evil is happening, and so it can't be the absence of God, unless God isn't the only God. If we're talking like multiple gods, then you could say that. But if there's only the one God, then God has to be omni everything. So. Yeah, anywhere evil is happening, God is present there for that evil. It also means that, like, if hell is a place, God's there too. God's in heaven. Like, everything that happens in hell has like God's okay because God is present. It's just like God's butthole or something.
New theology of hell just dropped.
What is purgatory? Is that like the taint?
Well, that would mean heaven is his dick and balls. So I don't know.
I don't know. If you read some of the Old Testament stories, that seems to be what they think.
That's true. Notice how godless engineer refers to heaven as just like eternally sucking God dick. So, yeah. So just making sure we don't get monetized. I definitely want to avoid that. So just getting that straight out of the way. So yeah,
that's what she said. So I'm still thinking about like, can you phrase? What was the question again, or the statement?
Like from the viewer.
Original?
Yeah. So the notion that everything is evil in absence of God, and that any existence of any good is evidence of God and His goodness. So it's like several thoughts there. So did you want to tackle like a certain part of that first, and then?
All right. So evil in the absence of God. What's the second part?
That basically any existence of good is evidence of God. So basically, like you have your dichotomy of evil is only like absence of God, and so therefore anything good means God. I guess.
Wait, no. So they're having it both ways. So that like evil is proof that God isn't there but exists, and any good is proof that God exists. So
Yeah, it's that good old unfalsifiability that
it's like having your cake and fucking it too. I don't know what that means, but yeah, I thought it was funny.
I don't either, but I'm using it from now on. The humanity, have your cake and fuck it too.
That it's strange wording that any evil or that you can't have good without the presence of God, and so the absence of God is evil.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah,
then did we corrupt the creation?
I guess so.
And God's like, this wasn't supposed to happen. This was never the plan. Plan B, okay. And
yeah, which so many ways to go with just that thought. Like I feel like this is largely a lot of tonight's conversation is going to be like very like problem of evil related. So
yeah,
um, so yeah, first thing is okay. So I remember going back to my final days as a Christian, where I was like universalist, panentheist.
mm-hmm.
Not to be confused with pantheism. Like I don't really know how to adequately.
They're very similar.
Yeah, but from what I remember, panentheism, it's not saying that everything is God, but like God is just in everything. Um, so believing that, and then also believing like as a universalist, believing in like ultimate reconciliation of all things to God, at the end or before the end or whatever. So I remember being puzzled by the notion of like God being just absolutely in everything and like everything completely finding its being in him and like yeah and like all that. But so in that sense I'm like, so you look around and obviously like whether you want to call it sin or evil or whatever, there are things that happen that we really wish wouldn't, whatever you want to call it, that cause like massive suffering, like pain, sadness, tragedy, all the things. So I was wondering if God is in and through everything and is himself or itself or herself complete goodness in its purest form, then how is anything evil even possible?
Yeah, God would have had to allow for it. And then, but people say, well, then God had to allow evil to be an option for there to be free will, and that is not true.
Yeah.
Because you can still have free will, and you can only make varying degrees of good choices.
Yeah, like right now, like even if like and we're not at least maybe or may not end up getting into the whole free will argument, but let's just say for the sake of argument we have free will.
Yeah.
But so the argument against not making us just so we just can't sin or can't do evil or whatever, and they say, well, you got to have free will, God can't put that kind of limitation on you. It's like, well, we already do have limitations. Like I can't choose to just like grow another set of eyes on my forehead, or I can't just choose to fly, or I can't choose to be taller, because I probably would. But so there's already all these limitations that we have that limit our choices. Even things that we may want to do, we still can't choose to do. So why not just make sinning or doing evil things, being unable to do those, just one of our limitations? And again, it doesn't even necessarily seem like you would even think of it in terms of limitations, because we usually don't think of that as a limitation of God, that he can't do evil. It's like, it's just not, they say, well, it's just not part of his character, he can't act against his character. It's like, okay, well, if we were made by him and we exist completely in and through him, then shouldn't that not be part of our character either?
Yeah. It's yeah. So before we go off too far into the problem of evil stuff, I was looking at what I texted you back earlier.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
And like, if someone were to say that to me, I think what I would say is something like, go ahead and believe that, but you can't just state something as true as evidence that it's true. Like,
yeah,
and it's like, fine, go ahead and believe it, but like, there's no way to prove that. If that's your fucking work, okay. But it's not a reason to believe that, and there's nothing in that to convince me that what you're saying is right.
Yeah,
and
mm-hmm.
it's not. It's really kind of useless as therefore as a reason that why goodness and evil exist, and and
Mm-hmm.
and because. And so at that point, it's completely optional to believe that or not. And so, like, somebody's believing that because they want to believe it. And so then, like, I would want to know, why do you believe that's true? Or why do you think you have to believe that's true?
Right. Yeah.
Because it's more or less like a theory that calms the dissonance people feel when they have a faith that doesn't line up with reality.
Yeah.
It's like, we got to have some kind of like fallacy or a therefore a statement, which is basically what that is.
Oh yeah, I mean that's apologetics really. It's, I mean, you could say in a way it's defining God into existence.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so if you just define God as the source of all good, then you can just point to anything good and see, that's evidence. Like, because of the way I defined God, for that to be evidence, that is now therefore evidence.
How do you think it actually helps somebody? Like, that person believing that whoever posed that statement in real life, IRL.
To the person who suggested.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because I've heard it too. So
I would want to know, like, does that really help you? Does it really help you understand goodness and evil? And like, is it helpful to tell people that the only reason they're able to do good is because God is already in their life? So why not acknowledge it? Like, I don't. I don't see how it's beneficial for the person who holds up belief, and why it's useful to share it with other people who aren't already in agreement.
Yeah, I'd say like most like apologetics or whatever, it's useful for, yeah, like you said, soothing any kind of cognitive dissonance, like just enabling you to keep believing. As
if anybody doesn't know, cognitive dissonance is where you have two beliefs in your head. They don't really jive. So you come up with a belief or an apologetic or something that links the two of them and makes them okay to coexist. It really doesn't, but it just calms your mental anxiety enough to like just go back into the circular logic around those two topics.
Oh yeah. So yeah, good explanation. Thanks for catching up the people on that.
Welcome.
But yeah, I mean, that's the way I've heard like apologetics referred to as, like, it's apologetics isn't for non-Christians or non-Muslims or whoever. Like I said, I guess we usually just we'll just assume we're talking about Christianity, probably, unless we say otherwise, because that's what we're more familiar with. But I'm sure it applies to others as well. But yeah, it's not for the non-believers. It's for the believers to just keep them being believers.
Yeah, it's for the people who have doubts or are worried they're going to start having doubts, and so they come up with the reasons to not really get rid of the doubts, but just shove them down, to make them to shove them to the places of yourself where you think God isn't, and that is really bad for mental health.
Oh yeah.
Because then you're labeling part of yourself evil, and guess what? You can never get away from yourself. So
it's true.
That's yeah. I've seen I don't know if I did that so much, but I've seen other people who do that with their faith, and they're like, that's the old me, and I'm not like that anymore. And it's like, that was a version of you, and that version is still in you because that's how you got to where you are now.
Mm-hmm.
Like
you're still you.
Trying to run away from yourself.
Yeah, that can't be healthy.
Nope.
Yeah, because I remember, like, for most of the time, like for me, as when I was a Christian, and I had that belief of me just being like totally broken and depraved, whatever. Like most of the time, like that didn't like upset me because I just thought about it just very matter of factly. It's like, yep, that's what I am. That's who I am. But praise God, He like saved me anyway, and He thinks I'm cool, or He thinks Jesus is cool, and when He's looking at me, He just sees Jesus, but not the dirty, ugly, broken me, or which.
Yeah, I kind
of. So it may not have like messed me up at the time, but maybe like in retrospect, it's like that was kind of fucked up. I probably have some issues.
See, all right. I'm gonna go. This might be a little tangent.
What?
So, all right. What was it?
Sorry.
Oh yeah. So if you shove something down and try to get away from yourself, seeing yourself as broken, and there's this whole thing that, speaking of dissonance, this is one of them for sure. Like you're supposed to see yourself as broken and evil without God. Mm-hmm. At the same time, it's even said that like we're so bad that like God can't look at us without basically like Jesus holding up a Jesus costume in front of us, and so that like God sees Jesus. And but
like we put on a Jesus mask like in Silence of the Lambs.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's why he had to die, so they can make a bunch of masks out of him and shit.
Yep.
So you're supposed to have this like really negative opinion of yourself, right? But at the same time, you're supposed to trust the way God sees you. And so you're supposed to have someone else's opinion of you, not yours. You're supposed to keep yours, but rely on someone else's opinion of you. And see what I'm saying? Like,
yeah,
that's why I'm supposed to see myself as both. But like, thank God, God doesn't see me the right way. I don't. What?
Yeah, it's like, thank God, God's not as confused about me as I am.
So I had the way I heard that explained once is it. For starters, I'll say that it's a really good thing to forgive yourself. Like that's just like good mental health 101. Mm-hmm. Holding things against yourself is toxic. And so holding your fallen nature against yourself, even though it was some douchebag and his wife supposedly, like the beginning of time, that just broke everything, including genetics somehow, even though they already had DNA.
Yeah, and broke physics and everything. Yeah.
So this person said we were in a small group, and somebody said, you really need to forgive yourself and for that. And this one person got like offended, and they're like, no, like you need to accept God's forgiveness for that. And like forgiving yourself when you should be like agreeing with God's forgiveness of you instead of forgiving yourself. Like you're supposed to focus the forgiveness of yourself at God. And I was like, dude, like, no. I was like, no wonder you're so fucked up. like no wonder you're still having the same problems and the same issues with your spouse. And I'm like it's because you're holding all this shit against you, just trying to take God's word for it that you're forgiven. And but continuing to hold it against yourself while struggling to like rely on God's forgiveness. It's like you can't. It's like, first of all, we're kind of saying the same thing. You accept God's forgiveness, but don't forgive yourself. It's like kind of saying the same thing. but the way this person is focusing on it led me to believe that like they're just not being forgiven. Like they're just not living with a sense of forgiveness at all. They're trying to get it, trying to accept it, but how do you accept something that you don't want? Because if you haven't forgiven yourself, or you won't forgive yourself in the process of accepting it, quote unquote, then you don't want it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and
because it doesn't fit.
Yeah, and how am I supposed to not forgive myself? Like, am I supposed to?
Yes.
Like, always.
You're not even supposed to think about it.
So even though God forgives me, and everything God does is good, then we're supposed to do what is good.
See,
so
but
forgiving me.
I think the logic is if you accept God's forgiveness, then forgiving yourself, it doesn't make any sense. It's just like a nothing. And I'm like, I think you should probably listen to a therapist instead of listening to like people who haven't been to a therapist. And this person who told him that is probably autistic, and so like accepting forgiveness when you don't, like, that might be a concept that works better in that person's mind, because if you're not very aware of your feelings and you don't know which ones you're having, like, forgiving yourself is kind of like a nonsense phrase maybe. And so but accepting forgiveness from the outside, that makes sense because that's an outside feeling, and those make more sense than the ones inside.
Yeah, and real quick, also, like, just so we're clear, that was like no shade at autistic people.
No, not at all. No. I'm just saying, like, this is somebody who is probably autistic, doesn't know they're autistic, and so they're sharing advice as if sharing from one neurotypical to another, and it's advice that probably would only jive well with people with a similar mental makeup. And that's my problem also with just religious advice in general around mental health, is because that might work great for that person, or at least temporarily great. But just because it has worked for you or other people doesn't mean it's what this person needs to hear right now.
Yeah, because in religion, it's all framed around like, if we find something that works, and that means it's the truth, and therefore this is the truth for everybody.
Yeah,
kind of thing. Yeah, which that's not how anything works.
No, and even if it was,
just like breathing, perhaps, but even that.
And that's just in regular life, like even not even religious stuff. There are times when it's not the time to say something that's true.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like,
oh yeah.
So at somebody's funeral, okay, like, yes, it's true. That person who's grieving is going to have to get over it. Like, at least not the same kind of grieving that they're having at that moment.
Yeah.
That's a fact. But if you come up and tell them, you're really going to have to get over this. No, fuck that guy.
Yeah.
So,
like, if you want to get punched at a funeral.
Yeah. Yeah. And truth isn't always helpful. And tough love is all tough love. And somebody says, I'm just giving you tough love, it's like, no, you're
yeah. And what makes it worse is
you're finding a reason to be an asshole and telling yourself you did something good. Like,
right. Yeah. That's, yeah. I hate the, even though like the term tough love, that can be like a real thing. I feel like every time it's used, it's just, I just don't want people to think I'm being an asshole, and I want to feel good about what I said.
Right. If you have to tell somebody what you're doing is tough love, then guess what? It's not. It should be clear.
But I think what makes that worse is when when it's some sort of like religious, truth, or something you think is the truth. Because like in any, like you said, it's bad enough if you were just to say like you said, if you were to say to someone at the funeral of a loved one of theirs, like, say, hey, you need to get over it. It's like, yes, that is true. But but I think it's even worse when the truth that
the truth TM
that you're sharing is like based in your religion or based in your faith, then there's that added pressure of like, well, you're not allowed to be upset with me for sharing this. Like, and you have to do like,
Yeah.
I remember when like someone I knew like had just like, uh, they're Christian, like had just like broken up with their girlfriend, like they were like pretty serious, and he was like talking about it, like he was like literally in tears, and then someone else,
Yeah.
like Christian, like said something to the effect of, well, just remember God's always in charge and he's got this and he knows what he's doing. And I was like, that first of all, that's your encouragement in this moment. But second of all, and you can tell like the guy, he just kind of like nodded and he was like, yeah, I know. It's like
that's that
so
thought stopping reinforcement stuff.
Yeah, and because I know,
or
like,
feeling stopping.
yeah, because I know, yeah, because I know, like, being on the receiving end of things like that, I know is like, there's, like I said, so I'm already upset about something,
Yeah.
but then there's that added pressure of, oh, okay, this is supposed to make me feel better, and then the extra layer of, but it's not making me feel better, even though I know it's supposed to. So now I feel even worse because
Yep.
now there's like something extra wrong with me because it isn't fixing me when it's supposed to be fixing me.
Well, and there's that, and then also the thing of like, if the person's already a believer, that's such a common thing to think. That's like, yeah, it's a thought stopping and feeling stopping technique where you're like, you start to spiral if you're having cognitive dissonance and strong emotions. You start to spiral, and then like just that little phrase like, well, God's in control, blah blah blah, something around that lines. Well, now that you've just like, now instead of spiraling, we're just going in a circle, which isn't any not better. And when I was going through my divorce like years ago, I totally believed God had a plan, right? But like, I wanted to know what it was. Like, knowing there was a plan when I felt completely lost was not helpful. I was like, just tell me what's going on. Like, do I give up on this? Like, what, like, how do I get past this? I'm just totally stuck on this. And then just like, I had Bible verses on the wall in the room where I was staying, and it was like, it kind of helped. Just believing that it would get better helped. But not having any idea what was happening right now that's what would have helped. Like, someone giving me a plan, like, oh, this is what happens when you grieve, and like when you have a loss, and oh, did you know you're autistic? I didn't. And so like,
it's good to know.
Strong emotions, you'll get stuck on that and just kind of like pogo stick, like in that one spot in your head. Yeah. So no, plan not so helpful. Share the plan.
For real.
What good is a plan if the people with the free will don't know what it is?
I know, right? Yeah.
That's some shitty logic. I got a plan for you. You're supposed to decipher it. I'm going to write it in a book. That was actually more like 60 books or something, written over the course of thousands of years.
Yeah.
And I will never specifically say anything about your life in it. But I have a plan for your life, and it's specific, and you need to follow what I'm telling you. But I'm not really going to tell you what it is. But if you don't do what it is, then evil comes into your life, and maybe even like the evil, the demons and stuff. And it's like, oh, and guess what? The demons can do things to you against your free will. But I, God, can't, because I'm so much better than demons. It's like, it's like, I do not think what is happening is what you think is happening.
Yes. Oh, man. I feel like this is something I say every week, but that's something I definitely want to do an episode on sometime, is like not just the concept of free will, but like the concept of apparently how God can't intervene with it, like specifically with topics like Thomas Ord's book, God Can't.
Yeah. So
How,
now,
yeah.
all right. So God can't force himself on evil. That phrase, I do like that phrasing. So God can't force himself on evil, right? Like he can't make evil do what he wants. But
Well,
according to the spiritual warfare, like healing and deliverance prayer model, we can force evil to go away. So, like, why are we able to do something with our free will that God isn't, or chooses not to?
yeah.
Like, why is it okay for us to do it?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I don't know if someone like Ord, I don't know where he is on the whole spiritual warfare thing. I don't, um, but yeah, I mean that's a good question. I mean, because even like yeah, so with Ord, I don't remember if, like the name for if there is a name for like the particular um, theology he has, but I know like people like Greg Boyd will say like similar things. It's basically like or an attempt at the answer to the problem of evil. And they say, well, God can't, violate this whole thing. Like God can't violate your free will. It's like, I mean, I keep going back to the example of like God as a parent because Christians love to use that one.
Yeah,
Like if one of my kids is like actively harming the other one, like to the point where they could do like cause some serious injury or worse. And if I have the power to step in and force them to stop doing that, and I don't, I can't say, well, I have to love my kids, so I can't violate the one's free will to, you know, mutilate the other one or whatever. It's like, well, but thing is, I also love the other one, so
yeah,
yeah, so basically, the way I put it is like a God who refuses to step in to stop evil, even when he can, is useless. That's
yeah.
sort of my little preview on that whole line of thinking. But
And the God can't thing, where basically it's a God can't violate his own character. Um, I think that's like the real short version of it.
yeah,
Um, okay, that does explain away some problems that other theologies weren't able to explain away. But it's it's basically a hypothesis that you can only prove and disprove with
mm-hmm.
thought puzzles or so so it's a hypothesis. It's an unprovable hypothesis,
Yeah,
unfalsifiable.
yeah. That they will declare provable because you didn't prove it. They will declare proven because nobody proved it false. But yeah, I mean, again, and this is a phrase I keep using when it comes to apologetics, but it's completely ad hoc. Like the explanation is not because there's any actual evidence that this is the case. It's, well, we have a problem. What could we come up with to solve the problem? So and then they just come up with something. Okay, well, if this were true, this would solve the problem. But having no care at all for whether there's any evidence that it actually
Yeah,
is true, just it's good enough to say, well, this is plausible and this would explain it. Therefore, that's what I'm sticking with, and that's what I'm going to declare is the truth.
Eh, so so back to the good and evil thing.
Oh, yes.
Um, this is people might roll their eyes at this, but evil and good are really just relative terms. It's relative to the observer
Mm.
because, like, and it's even worse when God's the main observer in the Bible, where it's like genocide is wrong, completely wrong, and will send you to hell unless God tells you to do it.
Yeah.
And so then it's completely relative based on like what God wants or doesn't want. But
Mhm.
even in the absence of God, uh, like let's say there's like this, I don't know, a huge battle, um, and in olden times there's a huge battle and like people die and they just kind of like rot in the field, right? Well, all of that death, um, seems like an evil. But what if the army that died was the evil army, and now they're not oppressing the people? Well, then it could be a good. You know, bad for the people who died, from their perspective. Good for the people who survived. Also, the good and evil thing doesn't make that much sense. Like to the worms and the bugs and stuff in the ground who are going to eat the bodies as they're decomposing. Like now that terrible battle is like the biggest boon like that species of whatever has seen ever. Like so that's this giant evil that happened for those bugs is the most awesome good ever. And so we tend to call things evil that harm human flourishing in some way. But because the planet is in a lot of ways a closed system, like lions have to eat the gazelles, and so like if they didn't eat the gazelles, the lions would die. And if the gazelles didn't live, the lions would die. And if they long enough for them to be eaten, like
yeah.
So one person's good as another person's evil, and
yeah, because I remember like watching things like nature documentaries, and it's always so interesting, like which animals the documentary essentially a lot of times takes the side of, or like the people in the documentary take the side of. Because like you'll like so say if like a documentary is like just following like a wolf pack or something, and that they're like the star of the show or whatever. It's like they go hunt, they kill prey, and like they're eating. It's dinner time. It's cool. It's good for the pack. They're all like staying healthy. But then I saw this other documentary. It was about whales, and they were like following this group of gray whales, and then these gray whales got attacked by like a pod of killer whales. And it was treated like, oh, this is terrible. It was like they were playing like the sad music. Everyone in the documentary was sad. Like it was so tragic. Yeah. It's like, but for like, first of all, like, I mean, we call them killer whales, so that kind of tips the scales. Like, but I mean, or they're also known as just orcas. So like, okay, but for the orcas, it's like it was dinner time. Like they're going to survive now. Like their kids are going to survive, their family and everything. So yeah, it's
like in the animal
kingdom, where we draw our lines is fascinating.
It's like whichever animal we can relate to most easily, that's the good guy. So we're kind of wired that way for tribal stuff. Like the people we can relate to the most are the good guys, and it's much harder to see people with a different skin color or culture. Varying degrees of more difficult to automatically relate to them. And then some people see that difficulty as like, well, those people are evil because I have a hard time relating to them.
But it's also like something else I was thinking about as you were talking was just in general, our idea of standards, like in particular, like moral standards, or really like any kind of standard, I guess. Because it's like it's like on some level we just come up with these like arbitrary lines, like, okay, so this is the level where our standards need to be at. Think of something like lying. So like with a lot of Christians, like, and this is like what I thought, because that's whatever the commandment is like, thou shalt not lie or bear false witness or whatever. Basically, like the thought is, okay, the Bible says lying is bad, so lying is bad. So then like the popular like examples brought up, okay, so it's like during the Holocaust and like people who were hiding Jews in their house, if like the German soldiers came to their door and asked them, do you have any Jews here? Like, what's the good thing to like, if lying's bad, then you're supposed to say, well, yes, I do. But then I think a lot of Christians would say like, no, like go ahead and lie because it's better because you're saving a life. And now here's how messed up I was. Like as a youth, honestly, in my mind, what I thought the right thing to do was to like still just not lie, because in my mind, The important thing was to take God at his word and like follow his commands, and then just basically just do my part, and then just have faith that God will take care of the rest.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. So go ahead and tell them, yes, I'm hiding Jews here, but then just trust that something will work out. Or if they do end up getting killed in the gas chambers, and that was God's plan, and but I was faithful and I did my part.
Yeah.
Which is,
no, that kind of logic. No,
speaking of needing to forgive your former self. Whew. But
yeah, but that like you thought that was good.
Mm-hmm.
Like so you weren't trying to do an evil.
Mm-hmm.
Evil like
yeah. So
you weren't trying to do a quanta of evil.
I was trying to do 2 evils. No, but 1.5 maybe. No, just half an evil. Yeah. But so basically, where I was going like with standards, like because some Christian, like where I was, the more hardcore, like fundamentalists, whatever you want to call them, would say that okay, if you do take that step back and say, okay, well, in this instance, okay, yeah, generally lying is wrong, but in this instance, lying is a good thing to do. And so some would say, well, that means like, well, then we don't have a standard on lying. It's like, no, you still have a standard. It's just like a step lower or a step higher, whatever direction you want to go with it. Like, because the standard is really do not lie. And then you can just add, unless it's to like save a life or to prevent harm or whatever, then that's still a standard. It's just not the super simplistic standard of do not lie. That makes sense?
Yep.
Yeah. Because I remember there was another discussion when I was in college. I studied electronic media, so like basically like media production, like video, audio, and all that. So, but we had a class on we would have classes on like media ethics and like procedures and stuff. And there was this one discussion about news organizations like having policies about like not doctoring photos or whatever. Like, so we had this like question of like, because one of the things that came up would be like, especially like when it came to like race, if there was like, there would be instances of, particularly like when it came to like African Americans, like if someone was like arrested and they were like a criminal, like they would notice like sometimes their picture on the news like would be a little darker than they maybe normally would be. So they're like, well, that's so, but. And I don't remember, and that was like part of the discussion. I don't remember exactly how it came around to, but someone would say, well, what if you like took a photograph of someone, but you just had like your aperture was off or something and they just looked darker than they should? It's like, but if you have that standard of no photo editing, like you can't go into post and kind of like brighten them back up. But then I could say, well, but it depends on what you think of as editing, because you could consider it editing as in having the wrong f-stop setting on your camera. That was
because sometimes editing just makes the picture more viewable. Like you can see more details in it. And
so for me, in that case, I was wondering, okay, should the standard be no editing, or should the standard be make it match reality? Mm-hmm. Sometimes that might require some editing, again, depending on whatever settings the camera was on. Maybe, like I said, the camera was doing its own editing in that sense. So you maybe need to do some editing to undo the editing. So yeah, so that's all that to say, like, yeah, just kind of rethinking how we view standards, and yeah, more specificity in standards is probably called for, I guess.
So the original question of the person was like,
yes, thanks for continuing to bring us back to that.
Everything is weird, right? That I'm the one doing it.
I know. Am I drinking too much or not enough?
I don't know. I'm like, what's happening? This beer is easy drinking. I mean, it is chuggable.
Oh yeah, this too, for it being an Imperial IPA.
It's only 5.5, so that makes sense.
Why this one's 8.
Done much.
Anyway, here I go again, derailing you, trying to bring us back. So
the original thing of everything in the absence of God is evil. There's just so many backwards things to that. Then the lack of omnipresence was required for that to be true. And I don't think that's what that person who originally like posed that as proof of something. I don't think that's what they were trying to get across. Also,
trying to save God by telling someone else that they've rejected him is not the flex you think it is.
Yeah, and since we were talking about like horrible things are good if God commands it. But because we don't know supposedly the mind of God and what the plan is and all that, we don't know what God has commanded and not commanded. So like, how do we even label something as good or evil? You know, because like normally it's evil, but like let's say like a school shooting, right? I think always terrible, always completely awful, and let's do whatever we can to make it happen less.
Yes.
Seems like a good idea.
Hard to say amen to anything.
But like for Christians who like will be like, oh, this evil is happening, you know, evil took control of the person doing the shooting or whatever. It's like, well, how do you know that? Like, according to your own book, like God may have ordered that. And so for you to call that evil isn't that like blaspheming the Holy Spirit, calling whatever God does that's good evil? And
could potentially be,
and
that's
so then that means that like good and evil is just something we shouldn't even be concerned about. We shouldn't even be concerned about according to Christianity. We just like do the things Jesus said, and without question, because we don't know what where God has bent His own rules, and so you know, like it's a complete mess. It's a complete mess.
Yeah, it just hit me. Like, just think about that. Like, so putting all those things together, like blaspheming the Holy Spirit. But if like the Holy Spirit, who is God, like ordered these things, and you can't speak against it,
but you can do it.
Like how fucked up, and with the whole blaspheming the Holy Spirit being apparently the unforgivable sin, like how fucked up is it that it could potentially be unforgivable to say it's wrong to murder children?
Yeah,
I need another beer. Keep talking.
No, I think this is absolute proof that the New Testament was a theology in progress. Like, you know, like I feel like somebody was booting up humanism for the very first time. Like switching over to like the humanism operating system, and like they didn't uninstall all the things they should have first.
It was still on beta. They hadn't
right
had the update patches, and
because even Jesus said like things like I'm the gate, I'm the path, I'm the doorway. You know, like he didn't say I'm the goal. He's like I point the way. I'm the path, the gate, walk through the door, and all that kind of shit. And all the knock could be answered, and and so like, and then people were thinking it through, and then Paul got a hold of it, and then he nailed it down, tried to like codify it.
Is that a crucifixion joke?
Yeah. And he doesn't even seem to be talking about Jesus like as a person that lived. It's more like, Jesus lived. But what's more important is that now he's a concept.
Yeah, and
because when he talked to people who knew the actual dude in Jerusalem, was it Paul and James and one of the Johns,
Peter, and
and he said they added nothing to his theology because
which was all based on a vision.
Yeah,
it's like I saw him in a vision, but these people who actually knew him and like lived with them and walked with them for years, they added nothing. It's like, oh.
So Paul took it a step further, but then he tried to nail it down while it was still in transition. And now we have like a book that has like the supposed part that we're supposed to pay attention to in the second half or second quarter of it, really. The last quarter.
Yeah, it's a small part.
Well, it's not cohesive. There's three different gospels, three or four different gospels, and each one's a little different. Some of them are very similar, and
Well, there were more gospels. I just didn't put them in.
right, some of them were super wacky.
Which
I'll bet most of them were wacky. So, like, how do we know that like Christianity isn't supposed to be way more wacky and
well,
and they just
also
pick normal ones?
And it's also not like the ones that are in there are not wacky.
Oh, right.
I mean, you got like after the crucifixion, like all the graves opening up and like the zombie apocalypse happened that apparently nobody else felt the need to write about like anywhere.
I think that's what happens when you combine different origin stories or different parts of an origin story, because the graves opening part, that part reads like a separate story. You know what I mean? Like that part is probably supposed to be symbolic, but the part before it was kind of like parables and history or.
Yeah, real quick. What I heard about that specific part was more because I guess the Jewish concept of like the resurrection, like it was never just like an individual, like one dude. Like the Jewish concept of resurrection was always a like corporate, like everybody. So it's almost, I think it was Matthew that had that in his gospel, and the only one. So yeah, they said that was basically what he was trying to do. It was like, oh no, see, this is like resurrection party, everybody. You know, this is it, kind of thing. So, but yeah, so
that had to have been. That makes a lot of sense because all the gospels are written by like Roman citizens who were Jews, basically. People in like the eastern part of the empire, because the writers spoke Greek, and the reason why I say it was probably written for like the eastern part of the empire, those Jewish people, and not the people from Israel, because if you're writing to people who are like Jew or Gentile, who have been to Israel, they're going to be like, we never heard anybody talking about all those people coming back to life. But if you're in the East and Israel's been separated from the rest of the empire through war and stuff, and basically like no one has been there for a while unless they want to die, I could see them like buying into a more legendary story, because like they can't go and confirm it. And even if they could, like after that one revolution was where the temple was destroyed and like Roman they put down Israel, basically.
Yeah,
there was an uprising, so they put it all down.
Yeah, just the whole thing. Yeah.
So they're like, who would we even ask if this happened? There's just not it's like, many people left.
Well, yeah, because people love to use like as evidence of the resurrection, like when Paul says like that there were like, or whoever it was said like there were like 500 eyewitnesses of like his ascension or whatever.
Yeah,
it's like people say, but people refer to that as like, oh, we have, as part of our list of evidence, is we have 500 eyewitnesses. Like, no, you have one guy saying there were 500 eyewitnesses and then not naming any of them in a letter he was writing to a people who live so far away. It's not like, first of all, even if he gave their names, it's not like the people who received that letter could travel all the way back to Jerusalem and look for all the people. Like, no, yeah.
See, that sounds kind of like a white lie, where the author is like, okay, how do I get it across how seriously people believe this happened?
Oh. See, and I have a theory that they didn't even necessarily believe that happened because of how it fits with the whole like Greek translation fables, and how this is just kind of a thing that people just said.
Oh yeah.
Part of their like whole like apotheosis sizing of someone, but yeah, whole other Richard C. Miller, look him up.
Yeah. So they're just.
Sorry, as you were saying, yeah.
So the writer, let's say they really did believe it, and they're like, well, I can't just say like this happened, because people are gonna be like, well, there's one guy says it happened. So you say, well, all these people saw it happen. He's like, I'm sure, like for sure, there's more than 500 people who believe it happened. So like, I'll just say they saw it, because.
Well, yeah,
I'm trying to get my point across.
Well, that's exactly how it works now, is like all an apologist has to say is, look, the Bible says 500 people saw it. And that still works today. So why wouldn't it work back then? Yeah.
And even still, people have a hard time separating spiritual fiction from like actual occurrence. And yeah, so there's. I was listening to one of that Rabbi Tovius something.
Yeah, Tobias Singer.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
he was talking about how he lived in, I think, the Philippines. I think it was the Philippines or Indonesia. He lived in Indonesia for a long time. He was part of a Jewish mission there, but he also had a lot of dealings with Christians because there were like way more Christians than Jews, and so he was kind of like almost a Christian, and so I guess they like to hang out with him or something.
Yeah,
and he said
a lot of Christians refer to like maybe think of Jews as like pre-Christian.
Right? Yeah, there's just minor leagues Christians.
Yeah, I think at one time, like when I was a Christian, someone actually asked me if I was Jewish, and I'm like just like immediately like kind of knee jerk response is like, I'm post Jewish.
He said,
which, my apologies to all the Jewish people out in the crowd. I'm sorry for saying that, but yeah,
but it's what happened.
Yeah. Everyone who was there laughed.
So if you laugh at it, does that make it a good?
Well, it was a good for me and the person who laughed. People who laughed. There were a few. Anyway, yeah. So yeah, Tobias Singer was in Indonesia.
Yeah, and there was a Christian megachurch, like big, huge fucking deal, and the guy was not on the up and up. He was the pastor and prosperity stuff, and he was like he was gonna do some end times shit, and like he healed people, and he was gonna, I don't know, do something that ushered in the beginning of the awesome end times in Israel. Then he died. Then he died of like a heart attack or something. And
I mean, my condolences.
And yeah, and he up and died suddenly. It's a big shock to everyone, and
especially to him. Jeez.
And people these Christians kind of saw him as a Jesus figure, and so this rabbi guy said that he said very quickly people were seeing images of this guy. They were like having meals with him, all of the Jesus stuff, and people were. So his point was, these kinds of like cognitive dissonance, grief hallucinations, where it's really especially your subconscious and your conscious mind wrestling it out and trying to make it make sense, because this thing that wasn't supposed to happen happened. And so how do we reconcile it? And so like one part of your brain produces this vision so the other part can like have something so it won't go crazy. And he said it happened extremely quickly, like within months. And he said, it's like to this day, people still like say they see this guy, and and he's like, and this guy was a criminal. He was not a good person, and he's like, he wasn't a good Christian, and he wasn't even a good person.
Yeah, so much more so with Jesus, because I mean I have my
and he said that for some reason it was the women. It was the women who had the first visions, and to this day have primarily they're the ones who have the most visions. And so he's like, his hypothesis based on that and the Jesus story is that there must be something about chemical makeup and difference in brains, where like either the women are more apt to talk about it and the men are seeing it just as much, but they ignore it or shove it down or whatever. But he just thought it was interesting. He's like, it seems to be women who see it the most. He's like, I'm not making any quality judgments. He's like, he's like, I thought it was really weird that it happened, similar to what the Bible said.
Yeah, I mean, So that whole idea of like having vision, like I said, whether it's like I said, lately I've been like tending towards the interpretation of like it's more along the lines of like Greek translation fables, kind of like how Richard
Yeah.
Miller explains it, where because like if you look like back in like Greek culture, like when someone like important died and you really wanted to like elevate their status, like I mean, saying you saw someone appear to you after they died when it was like an important person, like a Caesar or whatever, like that's just what you did. Like even like at the funeral of Caesars, people would like be standing up in the service and saying, "Oh yes, Caesar appeared to me in the forum or whatever the other day," and like, and it's one of those things like I don't know if people necessarily even like actually. They probably didn't actually believe it like literally happened, but this is just what you did
Yeah.
to like elevate a person's status. So it makes total sense that to me, like Jesus makes so much sense when you just view him in the lens of this was an apocalyptic, like doomsday cult leader, prophet or whatever,
Yeah.
whose followers thought he was the Messiah. And they thought and because if you look at so clearly the Messiah was not supposed to be crucified. So that caused like some huge cognitive dissonance, like
Yeah.
right off the bat. So just like any like modern like doomsday apocalyptic cult who's like predicting, well, the end of the world is happening on this date or whatever, like, well, when things don't happen that way, then what do you see? You see immediately what we do, like with statements of Jesus saying that like
you got to retcon it.
People who are still alive right now will not have passed away before they see the coming of like oh well, see what he really meant was, so they have to come up with these like theories like, okay, well, we thought for sure he was the Messiah, but then he got killed, like that wasn't supposed to happen. So how do we reinterpret all this to make it so he still actually is the Messiah and like our movement can like keep going? So I mean that makes total sense of why people would say things like, oh, he appeared to me, and oh, this is what he really meant by his like the second coming and like the day of the Lord, and like it's really
So I kind of feel like
of all of that,
like it's a mix of intentional and subconscious, because I feel like, all right, so we talked about like I should probably read more about philosophy and psychology and stuff, but so we got like conscious and unconscious, conscious and subconscious mind, and then there seems to be like this other part that like kind of connects for ESP stuff that like our unconscious, even our unconscious mind doesn't seem to be aware of, because like there's like connection moments or the like Aaron's mom shows up, like she like we have a homing beacon on us or something, and and she shows up and she's like, no part of me knew this was happening. And
like, do you think that's actually genuine, or do you think she's like kind of secretly following you, or do you think that's like legit? She just happens to be there.
No, it's very random.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we'll be like both at the same place for the first time, and she's like, "Hey."
Well, that's cool.
All right, so I kind of feel like people thinking, well, okay, the Messiah was supposed to do this, and that didn't happen. And so, but it was more of a spiritual thing. That's what it really was. And so I feel like that's like their subconscious and conscious mind kind of playing around and trying to make sense of, all right, like he didn't do the thing he was supposed to do, but I still have the spiritual benefits as if that's still true. And so they like try to make their current reality make sense with what happened. And I kind of, some of it is intentional, like trying to figure out what's going on, like what's the story, what's the plan, and and then latching onto something because it makes sense of what they're feeling or thinking. And like some people, it probably was a conscious thing. Other people, it was probably that's just what their thinking shifted to. They're like, I can't shake this, can't get rid of it. It must be something.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean it is something. And like saying that it was a spiritual kingdom. Oh, that's what he meant. So it's not like an earthly Messiah; it's a spiritual Messiah. That's one step closer to God dying. You know, because like,
Go on.
And it's really interesting. So, Gospels, Paul, all that stuff was written after Jesus died. Assuming Jesus was the real person who died on a cross. In the New Testament, people talked it to God, but it's unclear. People talk to God and talk about God, but God is not a character in the story. So,
much like he is in the Old Testament. Yeah.
So it seems like God died. Like God is not an active character. Like somewhere between, and so that radical theology stuff, like the Christian atheism stuff, is like on the cross, God died. Like that was like a turning point in human thinking or acceptance of the divine in the world, and then after that point, we have a New Testament written where God isn't even a supporting character. It's like somebody spoken to off stage, you know?
It's kind of assumed to be there. Yeah.
So I really feel like Christianity was a transition thing. And it got codified. Kind of like the English language. It's like the printing press was invented at like a shitty point in the evolution of the English language. And that's why we have all these weird pronunciations and spellings and stuff, is because just the hodgepodge of German, Gaelic, and French and all that shit. And then it got codified because of the printing press. It's like, oh, this is how we spell shit now. And it's all wacky. And I kind of wonder if that was maybe what was happening is people were wrestling with the death of God. And now we have this like theology that doesn't even agree with itself, and it's like partly atheistic and partly Judaism, and and like in the middle, I guess it becomes Christianity.
Yeah, I mean, so and this again to maybe like tease like in the future, like I definitely want to do an episode just on Jesus. But so just little teaser for that, and just a quick little thought. So speaking of like him for like fulfilling prophecies and like the messianic expectations, like isn't it weird that the people in the Gospels who are considered the villains are basically the same people who would have been the heroes all throughout the Old Testament? You know, these super religious like Jewish people. And we're like, well, why didn't they recognize him as the Messiah? Well, maybe it's because if you look at it, he basically, I mean, and there are exceptions, of course, but I think in general, and this just occurred to me recently.
He didn't do any of the shit.
Yeah. He basically didn't fit any of the actual messianic prophecies, like in, like the descriptions, like being like the military conqueror, free them from their oppressors, like all this stuff, bring about an actual physical kingdom. Didn't fulfill any of those. The only prophecies he actually fulfilled were prophecies that weren't even about him, that the New Testament writers like was like, well, this seems like a thing we'll say that's about Jesus. You know, things like when Isaiah says, behold, like a virgin will be with child.
Oh yeah, that means young woman. Or...
If you actually go back into like that part of Isaiah isn't talking about the Messiah at all. No. He is talking about a very specific event. Like he's telling a king, because like the Assyrians or whoever are like on their doorstep about to like invade. He's basically saying like, look, this woman, like you said, the word doesn't even necessarily mean virgin; it just means young woman, essentially. Is pregnant. There's this young woman is pregnant, and basically what Isaiah is saying, like,
present tense is pregnant.
yeah,
Yeah, it wasn't
right
like
now.
will be pregnant. Yeah.
And what he's saying is, by the time this woman gives birth and this child is old enough to like choose honey over curds or whatever the fuck that means, basically he's grown up a bit. Then the Assyrians will no longer be something for you to worry about. Now, first of all, that prophecy didn't even come true because the Assyrians ended up coming in and like wiping them all out. But I wish I could remember who it was that put it this way. It might have been Bart Ehrman, but he's like, okay, think about if this actually was supposed to be a messianic prophecy, like about the coming of Jesus, like hundreds of years from now. Okay, this is Isaiah talking to a king who is like under duress right now from an invading army.
Yeah.
Like, what the fuck good would it have been to tell him? It's like, all right, okay, king, here's what's going to happen. Now, you don't need to worry, because in about 400 to 500 years from now, it's like what the fuck is that supposed to do for him? That was not but it was like the New Testament writers like just trying to like tie Jesus into like the Old Testament somehow. They were just like kind of
doesn't that feel like people losing their faith, like trying to like grasp whatever they could from their old beliefs?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah,
yeah. So that's why I feel like when Jesus did his thing, that was an inflection point in that regional consciousness or like way of thinking. I think it maps fairly well with the rest of that region. Like kind of they're being an inflection point where growing out of something or beyond something or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of feel like that's what, I don't know when it started. It started a long time ago, like decades ago, at least, where people realized that that their beliefs were from the past, like their faith was from the past. It wasn't a current faith, and now like new theology, people trying to understand God better. Like new theology is just assumed to be broken, like the Thomas Ord and like Greg Boyd, and then to go even like further out, Thomas Altizer. He was the Christian atheist guy, and like he had a theology of the death of God. Or like we're to the point now where like God died in our culture. Like God died even among like Christians and stuff. The faith is about a past way of looking at things, and there hasn't been any substantial new theology discussed or written about in any kind of accepted way in like 200 years. Like it like the practice of theology basically died. Like it got to a point where like, okay, new ideas are not welcome. Any new ideas past this point, we're going to call it progressive and it's evil and bad. And like up until that point, like the people like the church we used to go to, like holding on to old theological ideas about like the queers are bad and all that shit. And like that's an old idea. But that's not the original idea. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like they progress in theology was fine up to a point, and then it became evil.
Yeah. So basically, what you're saying is theology is essentially a glass-studded dildo.
Yeah. Nobody wants it. Nobody's going to use it.
If anyone's wanting context on that, go back and watch our episode a couple months ago with Derek Day. It was you won't be sorry, but we apologize anyway.
Because if theology had progressed, God would have died. I think that's what people were like, oh shit, that's where this is going. But that's where it was always going.
Right.
And
yeah, which because you were talking.
And even if there is a God, why wouldn't we want to look at the natural world and say, okay, like all these things that we've measured, and they're like, okay, God can't be that way, because if he was, then these numbers wouldn't do what they're doing.
Either, or like, because people will like use concept like like apparent age when we talk about like the way the universe like looks old, but it really isn't. So well, it has an apparent age. Like, so basically, what you're saying is God is trying to trick us or deceive us.
Well, he's testing our faith. It's like, okay, so he did all of that for the billions of years just to test our faith. It's a little arrogant, isn't it?
Yeah. So what?
Or even if it's just thousands of years.
So like, would your wife appreciate it if you like tested her faith by made it looking like you were only apparently cheating on her? Like, if you like,
no, that doesn't work in any context.
Yeah, it's like, no, I'm just like purposefully like, I don't even know what you would do to. I don't want to start giving people ideas of what, but yeah, whatever it would look like to try to make it look like you were cheating on your wife, but you really weren't. Like that's just several kinds of fucked up.
Yeah, I think our brains think we need a God concept or a religious. Yeah, I think our brains evolved to need a religious context in order to do something, apparently. And now people are holding on to like an outdated concept because there is a God-shaped hole in our fucking brains. No, it you know what I mean? It's like the jumper wire to make something work right. And
yeah, and this is actually a concept I wanted to discuss last week when we were talking about Dan Dennett that we didn't actually get to. But if you're familiar with his analogy of religion as a nurse crop,
oh no,
do you know what
I don't know what that means.
So talked about like the concept of like, so a nurse crop is, so in the analogy he was using, so say like you're trying to grow hay. So apparently when you're growing hay, like when you first plant it, it's good to also plant like another plant like oats or something else along with it. And I don't remember exactly how it works, but basically the oats like kind of grow first, and they're, like I said, it kind of gives, I probably should have looked up the analogy before talking about it, but for some reason it's good for the wheat or the hay, or like the Timothy, I guess is what he called it, which hay, for like the oats to grow up alongside it because they somehow help it kind of get started. Okay. But then you can just like harvest the oats and like do what you want with them. And then at that point, the hay, like the Timothy or whatever, just continues to grow. So he referred to religion as a nurse crop for basically like civilization, like society.
Yeah.
He's like, well, for whatever reason, at like certain points in like human evolution, like religion is just something we came up with that like helped us like get along and kind of come to grips with things. And he's like, so basically his point is we've outgrown it at this point. Like we don't need it anymore. Or maybe at least we should start getting to the point where we don't need it anymore, at least. But
yeah. And so the Christian atheism stuff is it's using like the Christian metaphorical framework and even some of like the ritual behavior, understanding that it is like a nurse crop and that it is a metaphorical way to wrap your brain around reality in a way that like you couldn't cognitively do that completely. You know, like it's a metaphor that helps you grasp something where you just couldn't grasp all the minutia of the science of it all. And I like that because I still feel that like I have like a need for like metaphorical language, to help wrap my brain around it.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But like that doesn't mean that you have to believe it as a fact.
Right,
And I think that's where religion is going, and
yeah,
just the world would be such a more peaceful place if people were like just religious people just acknowledged that they don't know if it's true. Like,
yeah,
and just so like,
yeah,
why kill that other religious group? Because like they don't know it's true either. And like, why can't we just be like, yeah, we don't know if this is true, but like we're gonna live this way and we're gonna live that way, and like we might still fight sometimes, but it's not because the other group is evil. You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah. I mean, or another way to put it is just realizing your map is not the territory.
Yeah, and then
Your
it
map
can't be.
it might be useful for you in whatever specific circumstance you're in, but just or as like we've said on here before, is
Yeah,
like stories are useful, but realize they're stories.
yeah, and just like old maps, like we don't keep using old maps. Like we found out, like the coastline of the eastern part of North and South America was way more detailed and big than the maps
Yeah.
suggested. We fixed the maps, and
Yeah.
I don't get why it's not okay to fix the maps in theology.
Yeah, I mean, like think of it like so many other fields, like medicine or science, is like it's changed. Like, yes, if you look at the old textbooks from like hundreds of years ago, it's like, yeah, that's what people used at the time, and that's like the best they could do. So in a way, it was helpful.
Yeah,
But there's no way. Like, if I'm going in, like, if my oncologist, like when I was going in, had like pulled out like books from like 500 years ago about like what to do with cancer, I'd be like, I'm getting a new oncologist. But like back at the time, yeah, that's what they had.
somebody's like, "Oh, they're having a seizure, demon." Like, no, roll them on their sides so they don't choke on their tongue and or vomit. Like,
Yeah.
it's like do that to save their life instead of standing over them and try to beat the demons out of them. Like,
Yeah. Yes. No. Like now, the and modern, like more like evangelical, like charismatic, like Christians would be like, yes, turn them over on the side, like put some in their mouth, and then beat the demons out of them. It's progress. But yeah, like you said, like the whole concept. Yeah, but like the whole concept of like Christian atheism, like I said, like I totally get like where you're coming from at it, but and this is something like where I'm growing in. It's like realizing like the whole concept of Christian atheism is completely not for me.
oh, that's
But
fine.
but I'm also realizing like and learning to say, oh, but it can be for you or whoever else.
Yeah,
Because for me it's like you said, like for you, like the metaphor helps you like grasp certain concepts or whatever it is, but for me, like the way my brain works, it's like always like super literal. It's like as soon as my brain realizes something is just a metaphor but not the real thing, I'm like, okay, well that's fine, but I want to know the real thing, you know.
yeah. I
But I
find
just
it.
keep moving like from metaphor to metaphor to metaphor or whatever, essentially, probably. But because one of the things that I saw recently, like there was a post on Facebook or something about like Christian atheism, and it showed this guy who was like out in public, and he had like all these signs about like Christian atheism, and like one of them said something like reject God, follow Jesus. And I'm
Okay.
like, okay, I get what you're saying, but Jesus definitely believed in God. So you really can't
Yeah.
follow Jesus and reject God. Because if you reject God, you're not following Jesus anymore.
Yeah. All right. So I think just to like maybe explain Christian atheism a little bit.
Yeah, please do.
It's so according to the Thomas Altizer guy. Let me trying to frame it. It's more like a language for atheists, former Christians, to be able to relate to their former selves
Mm-hmm.
and people who are still Christians. like trying to communicate atheistic ideas in a way that feels accessible to people, and that they're not like, oh, this is so different, you've completely changed sides, and instead of and instead of that, showing that like this is the progression, this is where it goes, and showing that like I'm still kind of where you are, but I have different words for it now, and the different words mean different stories, and the different stories are helpful because I don't have to deny like helpful things in order to save the story, because like I know the story doesn't have to be literally true. um
Yeah.
So yeah, like his thinking is that every theology is a transition. It's a transition point. Nothing is the stopping point. Like we're trying to get closer to truth, and if truth is God, so be it. But like, let's get closer to truth, and that's what theology is.
Yes, and that's something that like literally like just like 5 seconds ago occurred to me, like as you were talking, like maybe why I have this like aversion towards things like Christian atheism and things like my brain just like wants to reject or whatever. Because I guess like so you say it's a transition, but I guess the way my brain is like kind of processing things, like maybe has this fear that, and again, just from my experience, is like just this like kind of apprehension around using a story or metaphor that even if you know this is just a story or metaphor, but at least for where I am right now, this is sort of like working as a sort of like surrogate truth, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Or like it's like, okay, I know this is just part of the journey, but this is the part of the journey I'm at right now. So I realize it's leading somewhere, but this is where I'm at right now. So that's what that's the language or imagery or whatever I'm working with. But I guess my brain is just always worried about, again, that whole like losing sight of the fact that this is just a story, that this is just a metaphor. So it's like it's not wanting to get stuck here on this step. So it's like, no, I was thinking, no, this is just a step. Like I'm not identifying with this step. I'm identifying with where we're going, kind of thing, if that makes sense.
Oh, so you're talking about like you start to live the present like it's where you're going.
Yeah, because I guess my fear is because this is what I see happening with a lot of like religions. Basically, is because like we've had religion, like as Dan Denton would say, as a nurse crop to kind of help us along, but a lot of people have got stuck on like that step of like thinking like that. So I guess my brain just has like a fear of even using that like as a metaphor right now. If I already know that's just a metaphor, like I don't want to get stuck there.
Yeah,
if that makes sense. Yeah, like I said, that's just how my brain works. That. Yeah,
and I think because I had kind of thought about that too, but I hadn't phrased it that way in my head.
Well, you're welcome.
So I think making assumptions about where I'm going isn't helpful, and like I want to avoid that too. You know, like the certainty thing, like wanting to latch on to something. And so like if certain language helps me grasp what's happening right now, or how to like how to convey my experience now with someone who is where I was like I don't know, a couple of years ago or something. All right, so here's the way to put it. Like looking at the story, like okay, it's like this, but not this. Or for example, when Jesus said things like "Kingdom of Heaven is like this," but never said it is this. He used a bunch of metaphors, like understanding that that's what religion always was like it was our brains going, okay, it's like this enough that like I can see that complex thing I don't understand as that, and I get it now. But like the back of our brain was doing that, and our conscious mind was like, right, that's how it is. And then the back part of our brain that lacks the like language stuff, apparently can't. No, left and right. I'm thinking. So the left and right, like one side has the language, and the other one's the analytical. But like the analytical doesn't have the language to be able to talk to the other side real well.
Yeah.
But it can do like the visions and stuff, and like getting a song stuck in your head, or you like that one thing that happened that you just are like, what was that? What was that? And you like get stuck on it. Like that's like this part of your brain using other things from the world to try to talk to the language part.
Yeah.
And no, so yeah, I think looking at the stories, having the attitude that it's like this, or it could be like this, but it isn't that.
Mm-hmm.
Just remembering that it isn't that, or that even the truth, like even what we're seeing, what we're experiencing is with like reality is like that, but it isn't that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess the kind of simultaneously like wrap up the whole like Christian atheism talk, but also kind of tie it back into the place I was wanting to go with like the original topic. So again, realizing like that for me, like what's something I've been growing in is realizing the difference between how I'm perceiving something, or is like basically if I were to say I'm a Christian atheist,
mm-hmm.
the reasons I would do that are probably different than the reasons you would use.
Okay.
For instance. So for me, like, so from where I'm coming from,
that's fine and perfect.
Yeah, because I guess my aversion, and like I said, I have no aversion to you referring to yourself as a Christian atheist. Like,
I don't even know if I would. That's just the thinking pattern that I identify with.
But where my brain is like knowing that if I were to do that, I know my reasoning would essentially be along the lines of, well, I'm still feeling a connection to that, and I feel like I just can't let go of it for some reason, or I'm still wanting to. I mean, honestly, it's also this like something also I've realized recently. Maybe the reason I still would say I'm a more agnostic atheist, even though like the more I think about it, if I'm truly honest, I might actually be pretty close to Gnostic atheism at this point. But I feel
but
like
you don't want to go full Gnostic because then you start ignoring stuff. You know.
Well, I think
my fear with that would be like the fear of being certain about it.
Well, but the reason is, and to try to be really brief about it, is I look at the reasons that people think there might be a God in the first place and just where the concepts itself came from. And to me, like looking back at the history of it, like it was all from the beginning, it was all stories.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, like, I mean, it's like saying I'm perfectly fine saying I believe there is no Thor, or I believe there are no leprechauns, or I believe.
See, I'm not.
But
not for the reason that.
Yeah. But like but what I'm saying is, but if someone were to say, I am sure beyond a shadow of a doubt there are no leprechauns. I am sure beyond a shadow of a doubt there are no Pegasuses or Pegasi or whatever the plural of that is. So for me, it's like all these things come from like maybe for different reasons and maybe to different degrees, but to me, essentially, they all come from stories. So for me, like the concept of gods, I mean, yeah, I just see no reason to believe that any do actually exist. So for me, part of it is just like, is there really a difference between not seeing a reason to believe that any exist and just believing that none exist? You know what I mean?
My reason for not, I don't know. My reason for I think being agnostic is probably the best place for anyone to be, um, because we might know that we might be able, we might have no reason to like believe that there are leprechauns or Pegasuses or Pixie or anything like that, but we don't know that our reality is the only reality. And I
Right.
have a sneaking suspicion that like everything we see is probably everything we see is filtered through our brain, and so
Mm-hmm.
it's everything we're seeing is probably just a metaphor for what's
Yeah.
actually there. And so that's
Yeah.
where I'm like, I don't know that we can
Yeah.
say anything is for sure.
Yeah. But I guess where I'm coming from, so on that, taking that angle is like, so yes, obviously I understand that there are things that exist that we are just not aware of, but I just have no reason to believe that gods are a part of that because the concept of gods came from our current understanding and our thinking that we do understand reality, and like it came from our
Yeah.
current perceptions of it. So for me it's like, so yes, there are things beyond our comprehension and understanding. I just have no reason to believe that gods are a part of that, essentially.
So I think it depends on. I hear you, and I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm adding a layer to it.
Hmm.
So, um,
Like a cake.
so with the placebo effect, if enough people believe, so if somebody believes something is true, it will have an impact on their life as if it was true. And so then at that point, whether it's true or not doesn't matter because it's having an impact on the person's life like it is true. And there's some evidence that with like the ESP stuff, there were some government training things where people believing they had the ability to do it, and then they were taught how to do it. Like,
Yeah, you mentioned this a couple weeks ago, I think. Yeah.
yeah,
Hmm.
then that ability kind of manifests itself, and it's not like it's not so much a real thing exactly. It's not so much that their brain was convinced and taught to have the ability that it made up. and and so if enough so say you have like a tribe or whatever and they believe this god is real, like that god might only be real in their heads, but it has impact on their perception of the world and what they do as if it's real. And so that's where I'm like, the line between real and not real is really fuzzy.
Mm.
Because
Yeah.
while we don't have evidence that there's any kind of Thor character, because we know what storms do and why, even if we can't totally predict them, like we know there's science, we just don't understand it.
Hmm.
Uh, but the impact on people's lives who do believe in Thor, and they're like, "Oh, I got to do the thing so it rains and my shit will grow," and
Hmm.
uh,
Yeah.
because like when we were believers in that same way as past us, like it was real and things were happening, and like we were part of the thing that everybody else was thinking, um and that really jives with the feeling I started having where like the belief that evil was manifested evil.
Mm. Yeah.
Because how do you know it was really there or not there? Because it's all happening in people's minds, like the person you're ministering to and people doing the prayer. And ideas can be contagious, and like people do pick up on the feelings, and who knows? There might be like pheromones and shit that our bodies put out when we're thinking a certain thing, and then it causes another person to think something similar.
Oh yeah. Hmm.
And so, like, the demonic stuff was real to the extent people believed it was.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess the way I would put, like, where I'm at with the whole like God concept is, So realizing that our perception of reality is flawed.
Oh yeah.
But just the fact that to me, like, the God concept came from a flawed perception of reality.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, that's like, there's no reason to think there's anything deeper, truer beyond that, because like,
Right.
yeah.
But it still connects us to our like genetic past, and you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
Like if your people group has been talking about things like this way for a long time, and it's kind of like how now we're like culturally Christian, even if we don't believe, because like post Hinduism looks different than post Christianity. You know, and so that's also where the Christian atheism thing comes in, because like humanism in India looks different than humanism in the United States, because humanism is probably like the next step out of like religion into a godless, um,
Yeah.
a godless goodness.
Yeah. So the kind of so okay, so I'm going to attempt to
Do it.
simultaneously wrap up the Christian atheism conversation back into the whole goodness, godness thing. So I guess my view on like Christian atheism is, so if I guess essentially it's me thinking that there's something deeper than Christianity than we're really wanting to hold on to, because if like I said, if you're really following Jesus,
Mm-hmm.
then you're not rejecting God. So but
Mm-hmm.
if you are rejecting God but still following Jesus, and okay, but you're only following parts of Jesus.
Right.
So that means what you're really following, you're not following Jesus, you're
Correct.
following that thing that's already in you, that's making the decisions about which part of Jesus to follow.
Right.
So for
And
me,
that's
that's like,
also always how it was.
right. Yeah. Like that's why there's so many denominations of Christianity, or what, however many other
And they
religions.
all think they're right.
Right. So, and this is like, again, going back to like a friend of mine who I mentioned last week, who said like, oh, I just feel like I just can't let go of this concept of God and like in my faith. And it's like, but the way that your faith has changed, and like as you're going through your deconstruction, and like
Mm-hmm.
you're already picking and choosing, like it literally is like, just like the fundamentalists accuse them of, like you're just picking and choosing, like we said, well, so are the fundamentalists, but that's beside the point.
Yeah.
But the thing is, like, that's a good thing, because because what this friend of mine was like, the things that you're picking and choosing are like, the loving and like gracious and like merciful, like, the good, what most people would consider good parts of Christianity. But it's
Mm-hmm.
like, so what that's saying is like, these things are already in you. Like, you don't need. It's like, if you're only picking certain parts of Jesus to follow, that's showing you don't actually need Jesus.
Yeah, it just gave you the confidence to choose the thing you knew was right.
Right. So for me, like, it's like, just already knowing that like that's what's happening. It's like my brain is just like already moved past it. Like, so I don't even feel like, how can I? So, and again, this is just maybe it's me being more like hyper literal. It's like, but how can I call that Christian? It's almost like saying, like, to me, it's like the level of saying like, well, I'm a vegetarian, but I'll still eat certain meats because I don't consider
Yeah.
those meats,
See,
or something like that.
that's all right. So remember we had it might have been a bot. I don't know if it was a real person. The commented a while back on YouTube.
Yeah,
The Levantine, I think that's, or Levantine,
yeah, yeah, hmm
and it basically means like post Islamic
yeah.
person.
Basically, yeah, like a non-Arab, sorry, non-Muslim Arab,
Right.
like that part of
Yeah.
the world. Yeah,
Um, and so like the Christian atheist term, I don't like that it has the word, like, we only have the one word Christian, right? And for an adjective, uh, but it's not exactly Christian. It's definitely more atheist, but it's not a complete rejection
yeah,
of all of it. Well, it is. It's a complete rejection of it. It's
Well,
difficult.
it's a reframing of it, you might say, or would you say?
Sort of. I
Yeah.
no, it's more just like acknowledging God died. God was never alive, but we like culture or we experienced it as a death, and um, and now we're left to kind of like reconcile, um, like all right, in the stories and the terminology, there was something helpful, like something useful, kind of pragmatic, not pragmatic, but it's something useful, and so still culturally that because I can't escape my past and where I came from. So like it's a way to like to move forward without having to like deny a part of yourself.
Mm.
It's like a mixing, a melding of past you and current you. Like if this is always where you were going to be going, then like this was everything in the past was part of you now. Like the you know what I mean? Like I didn't change. All of this has always been part of me in some way
Mm.
because
Yeah.
I can't go through life not as me.
Yeah.
So all the
That
potential
would be
for
a
all this was already there.
hmm
Uh, no, it's. And I started reading some of these books a long time ago, and I was like, I think my brain agrees with this, but I also can make no sense of it.
Oh yeah, I've been there with a lot of things. Yeah.
uh, no, so it's a repurposing of terminology.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, and honestly, like I think part of like my aversion to the term, and it's again, this is probably something I just need to work on for myself, but it's like if someone else is, you know, espousing something or like using a certain method or whatever, say, well, this is something that's working for me. It's like it's almost like I feel like if that doesn't work for me, like I need to justify it.
I think
You
that's
know?
old. I think that's old religious programming.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So that's why like I feel like well I need to like so like so that's why it's not good enough for me to say okay well that works for you but I need to explain and justify why it doesn't work for me. Which I mean maybe some people might find that helpful. Maybe some people like hearing my thoughts on it or whatever. But like I said, but I'm not and hopefully like you realize like I'm not saying you're wrong for like if you do adopt that label or whatever. But or anyone who does choose to
yeah,
adopt that label. But yeah, I guess I just enjoy explaining why I think I'm right. But
yeah.
but yeah,
And there's
but yeah.
nothing about like I'm trying to stick in an old framework. There's none of that. It's just like
Hmm.
okay, this is how I would kind of naturally talk about
Right.
this in a way because if I know the people I'm talking to
Yeah.
have a context for
Exactly.
those words.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think that also just comes back to like different approaches because like this is something that's like talked about like in the atheist community or really like lots of communities like I say like whatever like your goal is like it takes different approaches it takes different kinds of people so
Hmm.
and again like this is not even saying we need to necessarily have to have like the same goal or whatever but for someone whether it's you or anyone else who like for them like identifying as Christian atheist or like talking about the concept of Christian atheism if they for whatever it is they're trying to accomplish or like whatever relationships they have going on in their life if they find that works best for them and that works best for having conversations with the people in their life then yes that's a great vehicle I'm just but and it's also just part of me figuring out like what is my goal like what is my approach like where do I fit into whether it's like if I want to consider myself part of some kind of atheist movement or just like my own thing going on what like
I
but
That's
yeah.
all probably only helpful to the point that it helps you understand yourself. Like
Mhm. Yeah, and
because
that
the danger with it is that you like want to once there is a group name for it, then you like want there's the kind of feel compelled to stay within that group.
Yeah, that's why like I've even as much as like I've thought about like even joining certain organizations, whether they be like humanist organizations or like even like something like Satanic Temple, like not because I necessarily consider myself a Satanist, but more just to like kind of support like their activism and the whole like freedom from religion and like secularism in the public space, like activism type stuff. But yeah, I definitely feel that tension of, well, if I commit to something, I'm going to have to like actually commit to it. But then what if I don't like agree with it fully? Like just again, knowing myself, just how often like my views change. It's like, for the same reason, I'm kind of glad I never got any tattoos because like pretty much any tattoo idea I've ever had, I'm like, I don't think that's a good idea anymore.
Yeah, there's a lady across the street who has a Bible verse address. I call them addresses now. Like a Bible verse address tattooed on her leg or something, and she hasn't been a Christian for like 2 decades or something.
Yeah, yeah, like even some of the tattoo ideas I've had like post Christian, I'm like even just in the past couple of years now, I'm looking back, I'm like, glad I didn't do that. but so we're just over 2 hours now. So to kind of wrap this back, like this could, most people might consider this potentially like a whole other like lengthy conversation to go into, but at least for me, it's kind of a simple answer. So just going back to the whole that whole concept of like Christian atheism is like what are you really grasping onto? Like if you're only taking like the parts of Jesus, like since that's already coming from within you. So going back to our friend's question,
but it's all metaphorical. It's not even parts of Jesus. It's like, okay, that guy may have existed, but like, the story appeals to me.
Yeah. So what's the like topic ideas that our friend proposed? Like one question, and this is actually like what I kind of titled today's episode. So can you be good without God?
It's it's unfalsifiable. Any answer is unfalsifiable.
Yeah. Yeah, because to me it's a simple answer, yes. But yeah, that's
yes. I would say that. But then, if God is everywhere and everything, and every person and everything in between, then no. But it's
because there is no without God,
right
in that case. Yeah.
So yeah, it's kind of like what happened before the Big Bang. I don't know. Nobody's ever going to know because like we can only measure back to the Big Bang because
I mean, especially if
all of our measuring stuff doesn't exist before then.
Yeah, I mean, especially if the Big Bang is essentially where time itself began, then
yeah, it would be where time and space began.
Then before doesn't even make sense at that point.
No, before would also have to be some other place when.
Yeah. But yeah, so to me, like that question of like, can you be good without God? Like you said, it's unfalsifiable because again, going back to the whole like circular argument of, well, if you're going to define God as the source of all good, then of course you're going to see any good as evidence of God's. Yeah. So then of course you're going to say, well, no, you can't be good without God because God is the source of it. Like, okay, but what if he isn't?
I think all right, so can you be good without God? Yes, you can be good without believing it comes from God. And so I think that's the part that that's the tangible answer. So as far as we can understand, yes, you can be good and do good and be healthy, like mentally and otherwise, without believing that it comes from God. That's possible. And there's actually evidence that shows that believing that it comes from God gets in the way.
Yep.
Of getting better. So right. No, like, can we be good without God? I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine, but like, I can be good without believing it comes from God, and like, that's the impactful part for this reality.
Yeah. Yeah, and this, like I said, I want to do another episode just on like the whole concept of morality and where it comes from. Because, like, the apologists will say, like, because a lot of them will even admit, like, well, sure, like, atheists or non-believers can still be moral, but they just have no moral grounding. Like, they have, like, still whatever morality is in them still comes from God, whether they believe in him or not, but they still have to have God as, like, some sort of, like, absolute standard for what morality even is. Otherwise, their worldview doesn't make sense. But especially,
I think if you just say, like, okay, imagine a moral world without God. Can you imagine it? Okay, then it's possible. Like,
yeah,
because it shouldn't be possible to imagine an impossibility. Like, if that's, like, fundamentally, like, apart from God, not possible, then you shouldn't even be able to think about it.
Yeah, because that's one of the arguments that some apologists will actually use for God is like, well, the fact that we can even conceive of God must mean he's real, like, which.
No, it just means it's possible. Doesn't mean it's real.
But
or that in some universe it is true. Like,
yeah, maybe, I don't know.
Infinite universes, infinite multi-universes, then anything that, like, could happen is happening somewhere.
Yeah, basically.
That's basically where Rick and Morty get all of their storylines from. That concept.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but just thinking of, like, apologists like William Lane Craig, who will, like, talk about things like divine command theory. Like, if that's your basis of morality, like, then there is no actual standard, because really the only standard of morality is whatever God tells you to do, which could apparently be literally anything. Like, because if he's going to go to the point where he's making the fence, like, no, murdering babies can still be moral if God orders it. Well, then what isn't moral as long as God orders it? So
nothing. It's all relative.
There is no standard. It's just, well, whatever God tells you to do, that's what's right. And, like, that's not a standard. Because apparently if God can tell you literally anything, that is no standard of morality. So for them to try to tell, like, non-believers that we have no groundings, like, our grounding is, like, empathy.
Yeah.
Like, that's a way, to me, that's a way better grounding than they come up with.
And if we're created in God's image and, like, it's all according to his plan, then, like, doing what you want, like, following that internal, like, conscience and like, that's still a good plan. Because, like, whatever law is written on our hearts, then, like, you know what I mean, like, a way that if we were just being us, how would we act? Well, then, like, that would be the same as following whatever is written on our hearts. And so now we're like, okay, it seems like just acting as if there is no God is probably the best way to actually follow a singular God, if there is one, and kind of like half a dozen, six of the other.
Yeah. It's
So somebody's like, yeah, I'm a Christian. Okay. Like, and then it's like, like, I'm not. And then like, then I just want to be like, so you realize we're both having the same experience right now. Like, you believe, I don't, but we're still having this conversation, and this is still happening. Like that belief really changes nothing about what's happening right now. Like,
like, literally nothing. Yeah.
The sun's still doing its thing. The earth is still moving. Like,
Yep. All right. Well,
I really like that answer that just happened.
Yeah.
You're like, can you be good without God? I don't know, but you can be good without believing in God, or believing God has anything to do with it.
Yep.
Or you're like, I think so.
And if there is a God, he's apparently fine with me being good without believing that he's there making me being good. So
yeah, okay. Why evangelize to anyone? I've been having imaginary conversations with Christians in my head, and so, like, in the prayer tent where we're supposed to like anybody who's gay is like, I'm feeling like about being gay or whatever, and then you're supposed to tell them, don't be gay because God loves that, and and
God totally gets a hard on for you not being gay.
Yeah, God. God is so gay for not being gay. Or if somebody, or this is even better for this argument I'm going to make. Somebody comes in and they're just like, yeah, I'm gay, and they have no problem with it, right? Now, if you're so clearly, God is not being super obvious. Assuming the premise, God is not being super obvious in their life that them being gay is bad, right? So, like, where do we get off coming into their life and telling them like louder than God that like being gay is bad? Like, just roll with whatever God has been telling them. And just assume that like they've heard completely and acknowledged everything. So if God hasn't like assume the best, so steel man it. So if like just like why evangelize? Like why the need to be like, oh, it's up to me because God's not being loud enough, or they won't listen to the God of the universe, but they will listen to me. That's some bullshit.
Yeah, because it's like if you think God can speak to you and has given you the answer, why can't you think that He's spoken to them already?
Say it again. I was distracted by text.
If you can believe that God spoke to you to give them something, why can't you believe that God spoke to them already?
Yeah, or will, and it's like, well, you might be the first time God is going to share that with them. It's like, no, that's the first time I'm going to share something with them.
Yeah, which is that's my whole thing with apologetics in general. It's like, so basically what apologetics is telling me is that God didn't do a good enough job explaining Himself in the Bible. He needs you to explain it better so that I can actually understand it.
Yeah.
Because just reading the Bible wasn't enough, apparently.
Yeah.
I need some douchebag like Frank Turek to enlighten me.
I don't even think he could sell cars well.
I wouldn't buy one from him.
No.
But all right.
William Lane Craig is just basically a poop with a grin. I was gonna say a turd, but no, let's step it down a notch. He's a poop.
Yeah, like lower that bar, just like he would.
And sometimes when people are talking to him and he just has like that grin on his face, I'm just like, you're a robot.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like
but he looks like he's trying to poop.
Someone help Dr. Craig. His eyes are saying help, but his smile is saying love me.
Well, on that note, anything else to add to our viewers, like quandaries and anything you want to say to kind of wrap up?
Watch Rick and Morty. I've been watching it with Owen. Maybe I'm a bad parent. I don't know. He's 12. But I kind of feel like if he wants to do, if you have kids and they want to do something and you're like, no, it's not for you. It's like, okay, they're already developing in that way. Like it's best to have them go through it with you so that like they don't have to feel shame about it.
Well, yeah, because like something with Rick and Morty, he's either going to watch it with you or watch it with like other friends or something.
And it actually is amazing science fiction.
Yeah.
Extremely thought-provoking, weirdly dark sometimes. No, it's just good. He cusses like Owen cusses like a sailor when he's watching it. If we get him back in school, that's going to be interesting because the teacher's going to be like, he's just using cuss words. It's not like antagonistic or like rebellious about it. He's just using them.
It's like their punctuation. Yeah.
Yeah.
See, that's good parenting, in my opinion, anyway. All right. Well,
Yeah, I don't know. Explore things. Uh, don't get rid of the shoulds.
yeah.
Interrogate your shoulds.
Yeah, don't get an ought from an if. Don't get an ought from an is. Get an ought from an if.
Yeah,
That's what I say.
yeah. Stop shoulding all over yourself.
Yes. So thank you so much to our friend and viewer for the conversation topic tonight. That went a lot of ways, and I enjoyed it. So hopefully that kind of satisfied your curiosity or quandary or whatever it is
Yeah,
you were getting at by
and
posing those questions and thoughts. So if not, let us know. We'll try again. Or
yeah.
we don't
I think
exactly
the
have a,
fact
we
that
don't exactly have a money back guarantee
no,
for your questions. Like,
I think the fact that it was difficult to talk about just that topic or that question shows how weak that protest was from that person.
yeah,
You know what I mean? Like there was just not much there.
yeah, because it's like I said, like the question of can you be good without God? I'm like, well, yes,
Next.
it's simple, but
And then he's
in
like,
order to
no. He's like,
actually,
okay, prove me wrong.
yeah, yeah, but yeah, in order to like turn this into an almost 2.5 hour stream, it's like, of course, we got to go other places with it. But
Yeah.
but that's how we do. We do it for the people with all the things and the stuff. We'll do things with stuff you didn't even know you were giving us.
For people you didn't know were real.
Or for people that you didn't even know that you were.
Yeah.
I don't know what that means. That wasn't directed at you, maybe. Or maybe it was. I don't know. All right. Well,
this has been a long night.
mm-hmm. Not our longest, but
no. Let's that's what she said.
That's what
let's just close it out.
That sounds good.
Yeah, because I feel like this could go on forever, and where it goes next is nowhere useful.
Yeah, and I feel like I need to pee.
Well,
so that's probably true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tommy's gonna go do things with the stuff in the toilet, and I'm gonna say, may your things and stuff be forever with your people.
Yes, and thanks again for the suggestion. And if you have other suggestions you would like to give us, if there's just stuff you want to hear us ramble on about, please let us know.
Nonsense questions are welcome too.
Yeah, or even if you want to join us, if you want to be anonymous, want to join the conversation, anywhere in between, we'll take it. Like so. Until next week. Later, folks.